Welcome to the channel. My name is Garth Young. I'm a mixing engineer specializing in heavy metal, and today we're going to be taking a look at mixing rhythm guitars, lead guitars in a doom style song. The song today was provided by Remy, who's a music producer from the Netherlands. He is incredibly artistic and articulate in creating these kind of doom style electronics and incorporating it into metal. I'm going to put a link in the description, so if you would like to reach out to him, if you're a band in the metal industry and you're looking for this type of service to add electronics to your music, he is incredibly useful when it comes to this kind of production. If you like the content on this channel, please subscribe. Please also subscribe to Remy's channel as well, and leave comments, whether they're bad or good, it's all the same. Let's get into the mix. All right, let's jump into this video. So we're just going to take a listen to the song and just hear how the guitars sound through different sections. So let's take a listen. Okay, so these guitars are not real, they program guitars. Let me just check what VST it is. I think it's Electric Storm Deluxe. I think that's the one. They originally were the Odin guitars, but I didn't like the thing's delayed. Didn't like the Odin guitars, the way they sounded. They just don't sound convincing to me, and they have a lot of weird resonances, and the low mids just sound very weird. The reason for this video is because so some people might say in the comment section, oh, everything's programmed and nothing's real, but this is the real world, and in the modern day of mixing, you're going to be put into situations where you have to mix songs like this that are not 100% real and with fake instruments, and being able to mix a song like this and make it sound convincing is going to make you a better mixing engineer and make you more skillful. So if you're planning to do a career out of this, or even just get to a really, really high skill level, then mixing productions like this are going to help you get there. And also, if you don't have quality multi-tracks, you can also mix songs like this, because you can create them yourselves, and it's very easy. Well, not easy, but it's if you know what you're doing, you can create these kind of songs. So this song was quite difficult to mix because everything is programmed. So I think Remy did a very good job at the pre-production of these multi-tracks to get the guitars ready from the velocities and all that stuff to get it to sound realistic. So if we take a look at like this bass here, for example, you can see all the editing over here that's been done. So the same rules would apply if you were using real guitars. The same rules would apply. You probably just wouldn't be as heavy-handed with the processing as I have been here. It also depends on the way the guitars are recorded. If the DIs aren't good, then you're sitting with a world of problems. If the DIs are bad, the mix is going to be bad. It's just as simple as that. At least that's in my experience. So I think we're going to, yeah, let's take a look. So we have one stereo set of guitars, which is here. I'll just switch everything off so you can take a listen to what the, so I'm going to switch all this bus stuff off. First, I'll tell you where it's being bussed to. So this stereo pair of guitars is being bussed to guitar 1, and these mono set left and right are being bussed to guitar 2. And here are the buses, guitar 1, guitar 2, and these two are being bussed to a guitar final, and that's going into an instrumental bus. So on the instrumental bus, I have some compression going on here and some sculpting. And then on the master bus, we are going into Slate Digital virtual tape, another master bus compressor. I mix into this, and the reason for that is because I don't mix into anything else. All the stuff on the instrumental bus, master bus, is all switched off when I start. And the reason why I mix into this is because when you designing the snare, and you're using this type of compression, this top-down sort of style, and you add this after you've created your snare sound, the snare is going to sound completely different, because this thing sort of squashes the snare down quite heavily. And if you have this disengaged and then you engage it after you're designing the snare will sound completely different. So it's important to know that. And then just slight EQ shaping, tiny little move, and then a low pass, and mixing into a limiter. Usually I have the limiter at like 2, like down here. I don't have it this high. This was just the final number that I landed on. It's probably a bit too hot to maybe turn it down. These make a big difference. Transparent sounds different to punchy, sounds different to dynamic. These are all different sort of sounds. I don't know if it's like a saturation style, but whatever it is, they sound completely different to each other, and they can change the picture of the mix. So that's important to note. Let's take a listen to what this sounds like raw. And these were the Odin guitars. You can hear that these are way more present, way more upfront. Listen to the difference. Let me just loop this part so that we... You can just hear that these Odin guitars just don't sound good, but I managed to use them in parallel just to blend in a bit more mid-range, and I selected the Howard Benson STL tonality for that, and that's... And then for this, I've selected the Fortin Nameless, and I'm going into the Omega. So the Omega, Ampworks Granifier. So how this usually works is I have nothing on the channels, and then I'll send it to not a master bus, just a guitar bus, and then I'll audition different amps. The reason why I landed on this Fortin Nameless is because it's got a very realistic sounding top end, and it sounds very bright and shiny, and it gives me much more of a realistic guitar sound with these DIs compared to the other amps. So let's take a listen to what these two sound like paired with nothing on. I have my output on OBS turned down, so it won't be the full-blown master because I think it's a bit too loud when we doing mixing. Just a tip: mix at very low volumes, because you'll be able to hear much more detail when you do that, and you will also preserve your ears over time. So you should be able to mix, like if you're on monitors, you should be able to have a full-on conversation while you're mixing. So mix at very, very low volumes. Do not mix at high volumes. You will, especially if you're using headphones, you will wreck your ears, and you'll cause all sorts of problems. So mix at low volumes. It takes some getting used to if you don't do that, but you'll preserve your ears and you will hear much more detail in the mix. So on this for to nameless, basically, first thing I want to say is that this is all done in context. So there's a lot of guys who do mixing on YouTube, and basically they'll take you through a mix and they'll just show you how they've boosted 8K and how they've boosted this or cut this, and they're not really explaining what the point is of that. The truth is that this is completely subjective. The way that I mix the song would be completely different to how someone else mixes it. So if you're learning on YouTube, don't copy and paste people's moves. Rather look at what they're doing and look more at the techniques that they're using, and then try use those techniques and figure out which techniques work for your workflow and get you the sound that you want. One of the biggest assets in mixing from my experience is understanding what your tools do and your plugins. So I spent years understanding what every single thing sounds like in this, because I use predominantly the Slate rack, and I've gone through every single one and I've listened to what it does and what its characteristic is, what it happens when I boost certain things. Like for example, if I use this SDP one, I think it's like a Poitec style thing. So I realize that if I have this tube setting on, I can select the frequency range, and then I believe that it attenuates this frequency range that you select. And and I've also understood the characteristic that this console adds when you put it onto something. And then the collection of all of these hardware plugins also create character in the bigger picture of the mix. So the best thing you can do for yourself is understand every single tool in your arsenal. You know what it does, so that when you're in a situation, you can grab it and you know already, I have a plugin that I can use. I know how to get through this situation. That's very important. And the next thing is that you have to develop your ears, your hearing. I never used to understand what the mixing engineers meant when they said use your ears. I used to get so frustrated. And then when I started doing this for years, I literally locked myself in my studio for 3 years and didn't take any breaks. I did this morning till night, and just developed my skill, because I realized that you have to have a high level of skill in order to stand out. And if you don't, then you're not going to be at the top of your game, or at the top of this game. And I'm still getting there, just like everyone else. It all takes time to develop this. But yeah, so developing your hearing is super important. This will happen as you practice. I tweaked some things. I took some presence down because it was too much. Bass I boosted because this amp doesn't have a whole lot of bass, but it depends on the DI. I pulled the mids down a bit. Treble, I'm not sure if I pulled it, but this is important. So I'm going to switch these off. Okay, you hear how that low end is very apparent. So that would be, let's take a look. Yeah, in this area. Now you see when I engage these pedals, this low end dip down on the EQ. You can see it clearly, so I'll switch it off again. Mainly on this grind pedal. But I just want to make sure that this is capturing... Yeah. Oh, sorry, I had it engaged. So yeah, I just tightened the low end up because it was too much, and then I just play with the drive levels and see kind of what sounds good, and that's how I get to the sound that I want, because this is obviously subjective. Then after that I select the cab, because the Fortin cab is really scratchy, so I just used this cab here. No changes or anything like that. And then I go into a multi-band compressor just to tame this top end. I'm just using one headphone because I've got this delay on this microphone and it's driving me nuts. So yeah, this is just a way, if you see that your top end is too much, you can just take a multi-band compressor and just like kind of dip it down. So you're not destroying the tone by cutting in the beginning stages. You're just doing some treatment to control it, so that when you start designing the drum kit, you don't have all these frequencies in the way. And that's the reason why I do this. So when I'm designing the snare, I will dip the top end down just so I don't have all that top end, and I'll take care of the low end, because all that low end information is going to cloud your snare and other elements of the drum kit, and that's going to, when you're designing the drum kit, it's going to be difficult. So I always tweak the guitars and the bass to some degree just to get some frequencies out the way, so that I have a clear picture when I'm designing the drum kit. And that helps. And here is, oh, we pulled that up. Okay. Then I used ToneForge DI match technology from JST. I used the Greg Solar 8 with 15% and 100% spectral matching. And this sort of cleaned up the top end of the guitars. So we'll take a listen without. So I'll engage it as it plays. So what you want to listen for is how everything just squeezes in. It's like the top end and the low end sort of just get, because I believe what it's doing is giving you a frequency response of a different pickup. So that's what this is essentially doing. And we'll take another listen. I'll switch it off and then turn it on as it plays. On. Off. It's very subtle. So this move here, so I have it in expand. Let's see if we have anything here. No. So basically it's like dipping all the fizzy characteristics of the DI. So this happens before it hits the amp. So if you have any DIs that might have a lot of scratchiness on the top or weird artifacts, you can use this technique just to dip them down, but you must do it before the amp. So you're not killing the tone. And then just JSC clip just to level it out. So I'll switch all of this off. So when I switched all of that off, it still sounds cool. It might actually sound a little bit better in solo, but when you hear it against the mix, so let's listen. The guitars are sitting on top of everything. Now activate all of this and it tucks it in. But the guitars still sound disconnected. But we'll get there. So the first thing that happens, so you'll hear when I activate this, the guitars will get more tucked into the mix. So it's off now. I'll play it and then I'll switch it on. So yeah, the reason for that is just shaping it so that the guitars get tucked into the mix and they sort of come into the right frequency range so that they're not, all this mud is not floating above the snare and the cymbals and all that stuff. So it's just a cut at 279 because that's where I found was these muddy areas. And then on the sides of this, I'm just balancing out at 108. That makes a bit more room for the bass. Cutting a bit at 900 because it was a bit too much. It felt like this area, and you could see it on the graph. You can see that it's just poking up above everything. So what I'm trying to achieve is like a flat, at the end is like a flat frequency spectrum, so that I don't have this popping up here and this low down here and this popping up here. You want to have like a very flat frequency level for your tone. And then just cutting 5K and 2K because of harshness. And this is something you have to listen for. So yeah, there's that, and then further shaping. So this type of shaping is just to get rid of that harshness that these kind of DIs give off. Getting rid of some mud again, and low passing here at 85. High passing. And the reason for this is because if you have this, like, let's listen to what it sounds like. So you hear how that little low peak gets out of control, and then it just shaves this area off so that it's dipping it off, and then it's tightening the guitars up and then making more room for the kick and other elements that might sit below this. These areas, again, this area, if you look at it on the graph, so here's too much and here's too much, and you can hear it. And the way that you hear this is you listen to the guitars against the other instruments, and you can hear that the top end is sitting too much above the other instruments. And then the idea is to pull that frequency spectrum down so that you get it in balance with all the other instruments, and the guitars sound like they part of the mix, like they glued in. And that's part of this whole frequency shaping. So I'm just taming these areas based on what I'm hearing, and also based on what I'm seeing in this area, because ultimately I'm trying to sculpt them to fit. And then this was too much, so I'll switch it on and off. So here's off. Listen to how that area is sitting above the snare. And then when I activate it, the snare comes forward, because this is essentially where the snare, the fundamentals of the snare are lying. And then it's just shaving off some of this over here. So I shape it like that so it kind of curves and then just takes care of a bit of that. And then the high pass comes in to take care of that as well in the low mids. And then there's also a low pass just to clean up the high end and push the guitars more towards the mid range. And these were just resonances that I was hearing in context with the mix that I could pick up. So I just cleaned it up. And then again, I was doing dynamic EQ here, because you can see here on the graph that it's still a bit out of control. And then I'm just further bringing the level from here back down to this line. So the way that I see it on the EQs, that I want the whole frequency spectrum to kind of be sitting on this line, so that it has dynamics, but it's controlled at the same time. So I want everything to be kind of down here, you know, on this line. It's fine if it's going over it, but if it's going too much over it, then you can clearly see it here, and if your ears are developed enough, you can hear it. Then multi-band compression. So I'm going to turn this on and off. So it's on, off. Let's listen in context. It's just, this multi-band compression is a way of not cutting or destroying the tone that you've already shaped, but it's just dynamically controlling those rogue frequencies so that you still keep the tone intact that you've shaped, but you get a more controlled frequency spectrum with the guitar tone. Then I have heat wave, so it's off, and then I'll switch it on. Here when I switch it off, how dull the guitars are sounding, and that's why I chose to use this, because I knew what it does and I tried it and it worked, because the guitars sound super buried and muffled without it. So here's off and now on. So you hear how the guitars sort of open up and get some nice brightness to it. That sounds good. And you also have a clip function here, so you can sort of clip the transient. Let's see what that sounds like. It actually sounds nice when it's clipped, sort of like evens it out. And then I just did this because the guitars were still dull. So I just tried this move, did it on the fly. It wasn't something that I sort of have done before. I just wasn't getting any brightness, so I just boosted the whole top end all the way to the mid-range, and then did some shaping here just to control. some stuff that was a bit too much because of this boost. And then that gave me even more brightness. Because these program guitars can be very dull sounding, and I find myself having to do a lot of boosting to get them sort of in the ballpark of a real guitar sound. And this is sort of my approach to doing that. So off, on. And then because of all that boosting, I did some more dynamic control to not, and so I didn't use an EQ to cut it out because I liked the tone, but I just wanted to control the harshness that was caused by that move. Off, on. So you hear how when it's off, the guitars are sitting too forward, and then when it's on, it sort of brings it back down. So we'll listen in context with the mix, so it'll be on and then off. Off. On. So yeah, it's just pulling the guitars down and sort of bringing them back into the same frequency area as the rest of the instruments so that they sound glued and not disconnected from each other. And then here I did this with the Howard Benson guitars, just in parallel, very low. And this is just controlling the top end to bring down that harshness, because you can clearly see it there. So this is much higher than this, and that's sort of out of balance for me. So I'm trying to get everything to be even across the line, but still sound dynamic. And then more shaping. To my ears, there was too much of this lower mid stuff. Hear how that sort of honkiness comes in there. So I usually compare it against the other guitars. So you hear all that fizziness. So it just cleans everything up and makes the tones sound much more clear. Then heat wave again. Just to add a bit more character to the guitars and to get them more in the ballpark of the main pair of guitars. And then this is more shaping. Off. On. And you can clearly see here in the graph that this is a lot higher than this. And what I want is this to all be kind of even. So if we look on an EQ, see how much more even it is. Still a bit too much here, so we could do some, still a bit much there, we could do some controlling. And then the multiband compressor to control those dynamics even further. And I'm kind of just like tweaking each spectrum and seeing what it sounds like in context with everything else. And then I make a decision on how much I want to compress those frequency spectrums. More of the lower mid cutting. I find that I do that a lot with these programmed guitars because they sound very muddy. And that we just did. Okay. Then these all go to a guitar final bus. There's a lot of processing. I usually don't do this much processing on guitars. Again, lower mids. You hear when I disengage it how that lower mid-range sort of pushes forward to the speaker. And then into JST Heat just for a bit of flavor. So I have it saturated at 22.3 and 18.5% mix. Tone I have at 32%, and this is just listening. You know, I'm just selecting the plugin, trying different tools and seeing what they do to the sound, and then if I like the way it sounds, I'll land on it. So I try different things, and then I wanted some compression, but I also wanted to just like control it so that it's not too dynamic and it just sort of sits a bit better with the rest of the elements. And then more multi-band compression, because I felt like, or what I was hearing is that this low mid area was still giving me problems, and this is, I was listening to this in context with the rest of the elements of the mix, and that's what you have to listen for, is how the guitars sort of the low mids of the guitars sit above everything else. It takes some time to hear this kind of detail, but that's the way I hear it. And then when I hear that frequency spectrum is sitting above the other instruments, then I look to control it. And that's the kind of the way that I hear things, you know. So if I hear that there's too much mid-range, I sort of hear it sitting above everything, and then I try to control it so it comes back down and sort of locks in with the other instruments. And then just a limiter to catch any peaks. And then this sort of style here will also add some character to your tone, and that's just, you know, knowing what it does, knowing what the tone of that is, and then using it to further shape everything. Then we have some lead guitars. Let's take a listen. So same thing, just cutting out the low at 150 because it doesn't need all that low end, because I want it to be more of an effect slash guitar. If you're doing a different style of music, you might want to keep some of that in if you like that sort of low cabinet resonance of the lead guitar. But for this, it wasn't necessary. And then just cleaning up the top end with the 11K. And then control, again, this is controlling to bring the dynamics back down so that they're not jumping out too much, but I'm not cutting them, but controlling them. You can see how that's dipping that. You can see here on the graph that that's too much. It sort of slopes down, and I want to control this so that I get a more flat response. Again, here you can see it's too much. You can see it's all bleeding out. And then just controlling it. And basically, if I switch this off and then turn it on, you'll hear how the guitars sit on top of the mix. Sorry, if I keep this on, keep this off, sorry, and then I'd switch it on in context with the mix. Listen to how the guitars sit on top of the mix, and then while it's playing, I'm going to switch it on and listen to how the lead guitars sort of drop back down and sort of sit in the mix. So let me switch the bass stuff off as well here. Okay. On. And you hear how the guitars, the lead guitars, just sort of bring it a bit back down so that it fits. So you want to hear this in sort of in context with the rhythm guitars. So I used the heat wave to give the guitars, the lead guitars, sort of the similar characteristic to the rhythm guitars. So listen when the heat wave is off, and while it's playing, I'll engage it, and you'll hear how the brightness of the guitars sort of matches the rhythms. Off. On. See how it just locks in. And then it's more shaping. So listen to when I engage this, how the lead guitars against the rhythm guitars further get glued in and sort of find their way to be tucked in so that they sound more cohesive. Okay, on. Okay, so without this, I felt like what I needed is some compression to control the dynamics, but also some brightness. And I knew that this plugin had a bright setting, bright and dark setting, and a harmonic setting. So I engaged these two to add the brightness. And so this is BG Guitars by JST, to add the brightness and also to compress it. So I'll play it, I'll switch this off and then on. Sorry, this one. So it's off now. And then listen to how the guitars get brightened up when I engage it. So you hear how the lead guitars are sitting sort of behind the rhythm guitars. And then when I engage it, they'll push forward and create some harmony with the rhythms. So it's off. On. Off. On. So now the leads and the rhythms sound like one thing, and that's the whole idea. And then just controlling some dynamics, because with this move and this move, it pushed the lead guitars a little bit too in front of the rhythm guitars. So this multi-band compressor sort of just tucked them a bit back. Off. So listen to, so when it's off now. Listen to how the lead guitars are sitting in front of the rhythm guitars. On. Sits a bit back. Off. Too much forward. On. Pulls it back. So then it gets in that same ballpark. And then just a limiter to catch some peaks and give some saturation or whatever this is doing. And then this all goes to the instrumental and the master bus, where there's a whole lot of shaping and all kinds of stuff going on. But that's essentially the guitars. That's the way that I think about it. But this varies from mix to mix. Every mix will be different. There will always be different moves made, different plugins. I mean, I usually reach for the similar stuff. But the trick here is really to develop your hearing and develop the way you hear this stuff, and gain a really a really intense knowledge on the plugins that you have at your disposal. So, you know, understanding what the Transify plugin does, what all these frequency areas do when you pull away attack or pull away sustain, understanding what this thing does is going to help you use it in any given situation. Or understanding that on this limiter, these settings here change the overall picture of the sonic picture of the mix. And when you know all these things and you've practiced this over and over and over, you start to develop a skill in terms of knowing how to use the tools appropriately in your favor so that you can mix more proficiently and more successfully. So it's very important to know I would say that there is a world of stuff to learn in this type of game, and it takes a lot of practice and a lot of dedication, consistency, discipline. It takes a lot of that to get this right, you know. And I'm also still on the journey of learning and creating and getting better, and it takes time. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please subscribe if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment as well. Please also subscribe to Remy's channel. Yeah, and then if anyone wants a video on this drum sound, because I know people are quite keen on the drum sounds. I created this drum kit using only samples. The entire kit is made from samples. I didn't use any VSTs. I don't do that so much anymore because I don't like using mix ready stuff. The cymbals are of course VST, but the whole drum kit shells is all sound design. And sound design, in my opinion, is going to make you a much stronger mixing engineer than using mix ready plugins that some other engineer has designed. Don't get me wrong, they have their place in the mixing world, but I think doing a sound design approach is going to make you stronger. Yeah, so see you in the next one, and thanks.